I'm all for nutrition science. I think it's wonderful. I think it has its place. I think it can become another diet. There's all kinds of diets that are based on just nutrition and then a lot of food police. So we have to start with the mindset first. And then as we get a more stable mindset, as we get the how and the why we're thinking about our food eating, then we can start bringing in a gentle way, in that neutral sense, truly neutral sense, what is going to help us. If it's all the same, then what might be the option that's going to fuel my body, nourish my body physically, differently than another choice.
Hey there, I'm Amy Connell. Welcome to Graced Health, the podcast for women who want simple and grace-filled ways to take care of themselves and enjoy a little chocolate. I'm a certified personal trainer and nutrition coach who wants you to know your eating, movement, and body don't have to be perfect. You just need to be able to do what you're called to do. I have spent a lot of time in discussions and learning about intuitive eating, which focuses on the personal process of honoring your health and listening and responding to the direct messages of your body to meet your physical and psychological needs. So basically, it's just listening to your body and responding to it. For those of us who grew up in diet culture and hyper-focused on all things nutrients, hand raised over here, this is a steep learning curve. However, I do think this makes a lot of sense. After all, man survived for years and years and years without their calorie and macro trackers. And after all, God did give our bodies signals. I'm hungry. I'm full. I need sleep. Like, I feel like some protein today. Okay. I feel like some fruit. I mean, we have signals. Our body was made to give us these signals, but some of us have just forgotten how to listen to these signals because we've been following every single plan and diet culture out there. Even though my book, Your Worthy Body, is only 1 year old, in fact, we are celebrating that this month, the 1 year book anniversary. This is one element that I would alter in the chapter entitled There's One Best Diet. So each chapter in this book is a rule to break. And this one helps the reader figure out what way of eating is best for her based on how it makes her feel, as well as how realistic and sustainable it is. I really wish I had read the book, Intuitive Eating, before writing Your Worthy Body, so I could have incorporated more of these principles in it. If you're interested in reading this, I will put it in the link in the show notes, and it is a wonderful complement to our conversation today. So alas, unfortunately, I did not read this book before writing my book. So what I'm doing is I'm taking these conversations here to the podcast. You have met Erin Todd with the Intuitive Eating for Christian Women podcast about a year ago. And my guest today, Shelly Najjar, joins to discuss one of the elements of intuitive eating, which is called, and I love this term, the food police. And my guess is you know exactly what we're talking about, the food police. We do get into that. If you're like, what is that? She'll tell you what that is. But she brings this conversation through a filter of faith. And I know there are going to be some parts of this that just really hit home with you, or, at least they did for me. And as a reminder, like I said, this month I am celebrating the 1 year book anniversary. Instagram tells me that's a word, by the way. I don't know, you guys. But anyway, the 1 year celebration of my book, Your Worthy Body, Find Freedom and Health by Breaking All the Rules. It was released on November 4th, 2021, and we are now in November 2022. So if you're not familiar with this book, if you are new to this, I highly encourage you to grab a copy. Like I said, it's a wonderful complement to our conversation today. But what this book does is it takes 22 health, fitness, and diet rules and breaks them using exercise science and nutrition science. And it's done through a lens of faith. And yes, many of those diet culture rules are broken. So you can grab your copy today. And to celebrate this special anniversary, all through the month of November 2022. I am offering the audio version for only $5 through Authors Direct. I will put it in the show notes, but this is a free app where you can listen just like Audible, just like Libby or any other device. Grab your $5 audiobook copy, and the link is in the show notes. All right, let's bring on Shelly. Shelly, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I got to tell you that even just that intro strikes a chord with a lot of things. My community is a little more seasoned, and we have grown up with, let's just say, a lot of noise, right? And a lot of things, and we don't all have a great relationship with food. Some of us are kind of recovering that and figuring out a new relationship with food. But I think that this is something that just bleeds far and down into ourselves. So I'm really glad that you're here to have a conversation. So first of all, tell me a little bit about your company, Confident Nutrition, what you do, and just sort of what bred your passion into doing what you do.
Yeah. So, like you said in my intro, it's a nutrition company for busy women who have a lot going on to develop that healthy and joyful relationship with their food. And I think that's really important because a lot of times, because of the noise or because of things that we just pick up from other places, it's one or the other, right? It's healthy or it's joyful. And especially when we're thinking about, bringing in our faith and living out our faith in all of the areas of our life, including the one around food and including the ones around like our bodies and how we think about our bodies, I think it becomes really important to sort out that noise. And I think probably the biggest turning point for me in developing the passion for what I'm doing now was a hospital experience, not because I was in the hospital as a patient, but because I was in the hospital as a provider. And when I was there, I was trained as a dietitian. We are trained on nutrition science and the quote unquote right way to eat and the wrong ways to eat and how to educate and convince people to eat right. And so I was in the hospital doing my best, with the training that I had, as we all are. And it wasn't helping. It just wasn't helping. I would see patients and they'd have probably some of the worst days of their lives. And then here I am walking in telling them that they're not doing it right or that they should try harder. And I was trying to be gracious about it, right? Because I kind of knew that something was off. And I also, have empathy for people. Like I don't think you can really be in this job without empathy. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't just like, oh yeah, I understand you're going through a hard time. This is really important. I know you don't want to be here. I know the hospital food doesn't taste as good as you would hope. And then everybody's telling you like, well, now you just have to eat like this for the rest of your life. And that's not an exciting thing. And it's also not the right timing. So I think that frustration of seeing interventions that I was told were really good for the right reasons, but not in the right method and not with the right philosophy behind it, that frustration just grew until I couldn't take it anymore. And I left the hospital, started looking into other options, found out about intuitive eating, and felt like even though intuitive eating is not, as it was created or as it was systematized, is not Christian, I think it's built on a lot of biblical principles. And so I really felt like that resonated with what I was experiencing, what I had been taught that was true, and then the way that I would like to take that, kind of more able to blend that into what I know to be true from the Bible and how humans interact and how we think. And then, the nutrition science piece and the things that God has allowed us to discover about our food and our world and our bodies. Because I don't know, it just felt really good, that combination, right? And how freeing that could be for people, for myself included, that food didn't become the biggest thing, that our bodies didn't become the biggest thing. Because that's what happens when we talk about diets and the right way to eat, even if it's not a
Yeah.
diet, right? It just becomes this thing. And it's so hard to get away from that and to live the rest of our lives. So yeah, that kind of started it off on that journey.
Got it. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And, I take a lot of notes when I have my guests on. And so one of the things that I wrote when you were talking about the hospital setting is what I'm hearing you say is you felt like you were kicking your patients while they were down. Nobody likes being in the hospital. They're already being told, they've got this to change, or they've been doing this quote unquote wrong or whatever. And then it sounded like rather than coming in and being a support or being a tool, it was like, here's one more thing that you have to do. And nobody likes that. That's a terrible place to feel. And then the other thing too, that I love what you were talking about with intuitive eating, which I would love for you to talk about here in just a second. But how, one of the things that I love is when science and scripture lines up. And when we start reading that, and then we can start seeing these bridges or these relationships to what we read in the word. And I agree with you. I think intuitive eating is just a wonderful way of approaching our food and our relationship with food that to me seems very complementary to, or I don't know if complementary is the right way, but to how we were created, right? Like God gave us brains and bodies with feedback and all of that. So real quickly, I would love for you to explain intuitive eating just in a nutshell for people who might not be familiar with it.
So the super, super nutshell version is it's a way to recover and relearn the internal cues and put the attention there rather than on the external rules.
Yes. I will also say that as we get going in this conversation, if listeners, if you are interested in learning a little bit more on the podcast, I had an episode with Erin Todd, who's host of the Intuitive Eating for Christian Women podcast. And so that is another resource to learn. And of course, Shelly has a lot of really, really great stuff that we'll get into in a little bit. So let's dig in some to this concept that I've read the Intuitive Eating book. I'm definitely familiar with it. I actually just had an episode that come out that say, I am trying to incorporate this in. I am trying to walk with this, and there's a lot of things to relearn. And so I would not say that it was like a change that I have picked up from my guests and I've run with it, but it's a process, it's a journey. But one of the things that that the book talks about and that you have talked about, and I know you have some really, really great resources surrounding, is this concept of the food police. You talk some about silencing the food police. So I would like to start by you sharing what the food police is.
The food police is all the noise, like you had referred to before. It's all the noise, external and internal, that if it's internal, it's not the noise from like, oh, my stomach's growling, right? It's the noise from your head when you interpret what that means. Oh, I just ate, I can't be hungry. Or I ate too much and I'll have to just skip breakfast the next day or something like that. I have to work it off. That's all food police because it's telling you what to do. It's telling you what you can and can't do. It's policing your food, right? Outside of you, and some of those internal things we can pick up from the externals, from our society, from the culture that we're just in, right? Like the water we're swimming in, it doesn't necessarily mean like it's a specific place. It's just all in there.
Yeah. From
our friends, from our family, from healthcare providers, me when I was back in the hospital, all those different things. It's all the thoughts and the beliefs around food that aren't necessarily true. And like, I think even the things that are true, the truth itself is not a food police, but the use of that truth and the interpretation of that and the application of that can be used in good ways for freeing you, and it can be used in ways that kind of keep you, tied down or burdened, and that's the food police there on that side.
I think I love that saying that you just said with tie down and burden, because it can really tie us down, and it really does prevent us from the freedom of enjoying what you're eating, right? And that there's that guilt that we'll put on ourselves, or worse, shame, when we've eaten a food that BuzzFeed has declared as a terrible food, or that it is, like Apple knows that I like to see health and fitness articles. And so I can't tell you how many, I won't say it, but there's one particular thing that comes across that's always telling me to, eat something and not something else. And it's maddening. It's maddening. And it can create a lot of shame. And so I would love to hear why the food police, I know as a believer, you are really great at integrating the body, the mind, the soul, and all of that. So talk to us some about why the food police can be so harmful and in our holistic, really, existence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, we are made for an abundant life, right? We're made for an abundant life, and we're made for that life with God and with others. And we were made to love others as we love ourselves.
Yeah.
And you think about all of those things and how positive that is and how freeing that sounds, right? And then you think about all those comments that you hear from outside and from inside, and how many of those steal your chance or make it ridiculously hard to do those things, right? How much of an abundant life can we have when we're so wrapped up in trying to figure out ahead of time exactly which ingredient we have to look at to the micronutrient, and track everything and stress about everything, and you can't have a spontaneous night out with your spouse because you didn't look up the menu ahead of time, and so there's all that stress and anxiety. And then if they're saying, oh well, you can just look at it now, it's okay, you can take your time, then you have the pressure there, and it's all the feeling of being out of control, except then all the food police inside and outside is trying to control something that it's not meant to. So when we talk about like boundaries was a really great book too. If you're looking for another book recommendation, if you've ever read that one, it talks a lot about, what is yours to have a say over and what is not yours to have a say over. And when it's something that you actually have a say over, right? Like, oh, I get to decide to some degree my schedule, right? Or I get to decide what I, am drinking, like what kind of tea I'm drinking in the morning. And then there's other things that are outside of my control. Maybe they're yours, right? So like on your schedule, where our schedules overlap or where they, affect each other, that's where we can together have that. But I don't get to control your stuff, what you choose to eat, for example. But as a food police, I'm trying to take that control, right?
Right.
And that's not control I was ever meant to have. And that robs both of us of some of that community aspect, right? The good functioning in that community. It also takes away from that joyful life. If we're giving over control where that was supposed to be on us to decide, what do we eat? And we can get more into that too, is like, again, not entirely under our control, but for the most part, it kind of is. Then if we're giving up a lot of that power, a lot of that decision-making, we end up saying that we're a victim in and of our circumstances in ways that we aren't. And then it takes some of that personal responsibility, and we're saying, I'm going to give it to this person over here. I'm going to give it to that thing over there. And then what? We were supposed to take some of that, right? And then we're not supposed to take others. Like right. when we hear a lot of the food police talks about our size or our shape, because it's connected, we think that if we eat this food, it will change our shape or size one way or another. Or if we don't eat that food, it will change our shape or size. And so there's all this sayings and talks and judgments that come out inside and outside about that food and our decisions around that food and our decisions around our bodies. When we get that part, like, are we trying to control the shape and size of our bodies where that's not entirely under our control? And actually the majority of that is not under our control. And that's something that God has already determined, right? Or is something that's going to just happen based on your genetics and your circumstances and things like that, you don't actually have control over that as much as we are taught to believe that we do. So when we think about those things, like when we think about the significance of the food police in keeping us from our purpose and the joy that we could have in Christ when our focus is not on our food and our bodies and, trying to control everybody else's food and their bodies, it's something that distracts us, I think. It's something that takes us away. It's something that twists truth. Like I was talking about, right? Truth is just truth. It's just there. But the way that it's used or the way that it's misused, right? Not necessarily truth. Truth will set us free, right? But the way that we interpret that, what we say, it makes it mean, like even Satan in the garden, right? He's like, oh, well, did God really say, right? Or just like a little bit, he just nudges it just a tiny bit, right? And that just tiny bit off the truth is just enough to say, oh, yeah, now we're going to spin into this different direction. And I think that's where it gets really, really, it's not just like, oh, we just feel bad about ourselves or somebody's telling us lies. No, it's deeply impacting like our whole life, including our spiritual lives, when we let this get out of hand, right?
Right. Well, and the other thing too, I think that you're talking about is, in the garden with the enemy, it was, did God really say so? He was really attacking our mind, right? And the mind is what is keeping us from having that joyful life and having that greater purpose than just what we look like. One of the things that I noticed when I was doing some research on you is you spend some time really supporting ministry groups, which I love. And you bring this message to various ministry groups. And one of the things that I wrote down from your website is you celebrate the creative diversity that God displays through our human bodies, which I just love. I think, in theory, like I am like, yes, absolutely. This is part of my message. I am in there. And then I'm frustrated because my clothes aren't fitting because my body's changing, or I'm frustrating, and there may be other people out there who have gone through a health issue and their body has adjusted one way or the other, or they're not able to do what they used to be able to do. And we get these physical changes, and actually applying it to our own lives, applying this, celebrating the creative diversity that God displays can be really, really difficult. What kind of encouragement can you give to someone who's just struggling to accept her own body and as one that is designed by God's creative diversity?
I think the first thing I'd say is I understand to the degree that I can. Right? I'm not in all of those situations.
Sure.
But I understand not believing that. I understand that, we can accept it intellectually some of the time. And then in our heart, it's like, we just have so much trouble with believing that God didn't make a mistake with me, or I didn't make a mistake and push myself off of, God's design somehow. That it's not that my body, that my situation is so unique that it's out of the creative diversity that God has created. Like, I get that part of it. And I think that's the piece that we have to understand. Like, I'm always thinking about where is this coming from? And I think that, in the episode that you were talking with Erin Todd about, I think she mentions that question too. Where is this coming from? Where did you get that from? That's such a great question, because it gets at the root of, is this true or is this not, right? Who is telling you this? Whose voice is this that you're hearing? Because we know that we're fearfully and wonderfully made. We know that God doesn't make mistakes, right? If we think, it's messed up because, we don't have the same degree of ability that we used to, or that other people do, or, whether that's physical or emotional or mental or whatever, that our abilities are also diverse. And that, there's like, we think of the bell curve shape and we're like, well, but everybody else is in the middle. No, everybody else is not in the middle. There's people on the end still. And if you happen to be on the ends of whatever thing we're looking at here, that's your story, right? That's part of your story, I should say. It doesn't mean that you are the exception and God no longer loves you, or God no longer has a purpose for you, or that you can't find joy and satisfaction where you are with who you are and what God is doing in your life right now. It may not look like what you expected. And I think that's the hardest thing for me a lot of times, is it may not look like the way that I expected it to look, right? Like,
right.
Me being this wonderful creation of God, I have an idea of what that should look like and what I should be able to do as a wonderful creation of God. And at the same time, my thoughts are not the same thoughts as God's thoughts, right? So I think part of it is coming with, and I think this is for me the hardest part, right? Like, I have to have the humility to accept what God's will is. And I'm not saying that on earth we're all going to be perfectly in God's will, because we're not living in heaven, right? This is not heaven on earth right now. This is earth, and there is other things going on. And I think it's okay if you're not there yet, right? Like, it's okay. That's part of the growth and the journey. As we get closer and closer to God, I think we will be more and more convinced of his goodness in our lives, and in the way that he created us, and the way that he designed us as human beings. And, I think about, yes, we are unique as humans, and also we're part of God's larger creation. And as part of God's larger creation, when we look around, we don't say, wow, that tree, it's so ugly because it's different than all the other trees. That red leaf on the green tree, that's so ugly because it's a red leaf and it's all different than all the other green trees. We go, look, it's a sign of fall. That's so beautiful. Look, right. That tree is all twisted, and look, it's beautiful in its age. Look at the story of its rings. Look at the way that it's shaped. Look at those dogs. Like, oh, they're all different shapes and sizes. This one's so cute. This one's so large. Like, wow. We don't have this emotional connection that we do to our bodies and to other people's bodies, where we're saying, like, wow, why am I so different? Like, that tree's not going, wow, I'm so different. I feel so bad about myself. It is a tree declaring the goodness of God and his creative work. And we are people declaring the goodness of God and his creative work. And the more that I remind myself of that, the slightly easier it is. But, it has to be a building, right? We have to build that trust, and we have to build that understanding of who God is, and how, like, to purposely choose to see the good in things that are not always the way that we wanted them to be. And when we do that, the more we do it, the less challenging it gets. I won't say it gets easy,
right?
Sometimes the challenges increase, right? We increase our capacity for bigger and bigger challenges. But also, along with that capacity, the reason our capacity is growing is because our faith is growing too. Mm-hmm. And so I don't want to say it's easy, but it gets better. And
right.
Yeah, that's how I would encourage people, and myself, like, as I'm hearing myself say this too.
Well, that's so good. That's so good. And, one of the things that I wrote is our wonderful creation of God is, now I can't read my own writing, but it's influenced outside of God, right? Like, we think, I love that you were saying that we get this idea of what a wonderful creation of God is, but that's not always, like, where did we get that, right? Like, that comes from source, or from other things outside of God. So that's just a great reminder. Thank you for that. I want to go back up to the food police a little bit. So this is something that I personally struggle with, and I think others who might be a little interested in starting to adopt the intuitive eating journey, my guess is this is something that they would struggle with as well. So I love learning about the science of stuff. I love learning about the science of how the body moves and why we move the way we do. I just released this program called Be Complete, which is like the ways that we want to move as we're getting older, but we don't always take the time to do. Like I love, love, love the science behind all that stuff. I also love the science of learning about food and how it can fuel us and how it can make us feel well and all of that stuff. And I will say I'm not like I've gotten past the point of feeling like there's good foods and there's bad foods, right? Like I I'm on board with that. I'm totally on board with that. But this is where my struggle is. So, how do I integrate some of the food science out there that is beneficial, that can be helpful, and at the same time not be bound by it and not be have it overridden with this food police that when I for example, when I'm traveling and I, have a cheeseburger and fries, even though I know that's not going to make me feel very good, because it kind of doesn't. Or some of anyway. But taking away that food police, taking away all of that. So, kind of like integrating this food science and relying on my body signals, relying on what I feel like I'm needing. Because I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's where my personal struggle is. And I have a feeling I'm not alone in this.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone in this either. I hear it a lot from the people I talk with and the people I help. It's actually one of the biggest fears that I am able to witness and that gets shared with me too, is if I let go of the idea that there are good and bad foods, then I would just eat everything and it would be cookies all the time and only cookies. And I would feel like, a garbage dump, or I would feel like I'm sick all the time, or I would feel like I could never be healthy, or what about the vegetables? I'm supposed to eat vegetables, right? What I would do with all of that is to say you're not alone, because I think that's one of the other pieces, right? Is the food police are very isolating. And when we're thinking about the food police, even if we don't say that there's good and bad foods, what they often tell you is that you're the only one who's struggling with this problem.
Yeah.
And that's not true. And it's okay to be afraid of this new idea and what might happen if you were to give up that idea of good and bad foods, or if you were to give yourself permission to eat the food you wanted to eat and to enjoy your food. And that's okay. What I tell people is we have to start with the mindset first. I'm all for nutrition science. I think it's wonderful. I think it has its place. I think it can become another diet, right? It's just like
right.
Eating healthy or eating whatever. Like there's all kinds of diets that are based on just nutrition and then a lot of food police. So we have to start with the mindset first. And then as we get a more stable mindset, as we get the how and the why we're thinking about our food, why we're eating, then we can start bringing in a gentle way, in that neutral sense, truly neutral sense, what is going to help us. If it's all the same, then what might be the option that's going to fuel my body, nourish my body physically differently than another choice, if it's all the same. And I think that's really important, because it doesn't mean that I'm saying a carrot is the same as a carrot cake is the same if it's all the same. No, that's not what I mean. Every food interacts in our body differently. Every food gives us different combination of nutrients. Our bodies are so cool that they can get nutrients, they can get nourishment from just about anything that we eat. Yes, even the processed foods, even the sugar stuff, right? Like carbohydrates are used for fuel. It's really cool that we can do that. And we have access to nutrition science knowledge that we can apply to our situation. We can't directly apply it in all cases. Nutrition science is population-based most of the time. And we are not a population, right? We eat as individuals. Yes, we might eat in community, but individually, like the vitamin C in that orange is not going to be distributed equally among all the people who are sitting at that table. If you really don't like oranges, or if you're allergic to oranges, that is not going to be the most helpful thing that you could do. Even if you needed fiber and vitamin C, things that are found in oranges, you may choose not to eat the orange. Why? But oranges are so good. They're an orange food and, blah, blah. But for you individually, it doesn't make sense, right? And we get that doesn't make sense piece from the individual data. And that individual data comes from the internal cues that our bodies are giving. And so we're going back again and again to saying, God has created this wonderful body that gives us signals, that gives us feedback about how much is too much, right? Even that much. Like sometimes we say, I think that's enough in our brains. We hear ourselves say, or we hear other people say, are you sure you want that? Do you really want a second one? Or I think you've already had enough food today. You've gone over your certain number of whatever's that you're tracking. Your app number turns red or whatever, it starts freaking out. Any of
Yeah.
those things, right? It's not based on the internal part. It's based on the head knowledge in quotes, or the stories that you're getting from other people or outside things, right?
Mhm.
And yeah, sometimes that's based on population data, but even that data isn't always true or is interpreted incorrectly and then applied or misapplied to the individual. And so when we're thinking about making this something that is healthy, it is life-giving, it is something that's going to help us feel good, because I think a lot of people, like all of us, we want to feel healthy, we want to feel good, we want to have the energy we can have, right?
Right.
We don't want to eat
Yeah.
something and feel sluggish afterwards. So that you don't even have to have nutrition knowledge for. You can work with somebody, like you or me or Aaron or whoever, that will help you figure out, based on our knowledge and our background of that science, that can be applied to the individual. But you also have a lot of information that's already coming from inside about, when I ate that thing in my body afterwards, I felt really tired and I
Right.
got really sleepy, or I felt super hungry super fast after I ate that. It just wasn't, it didn't do it for me, it didn't satisfy me. And that piece of satisfaction is one of the first places to start. It actually, talking about nutrition science, right? When we have more satisfaction, we actually follow more of the nutrition recommendations overall, because our bodies are that cool, right? We
Yeah.
will not want cookies every day for the rest of our
Right.
life.
Right.
It'll just get really boring, and we'll start feeling like, oh, I don't want another cookie, right? Even if it's your favorite food, you would
Right.
want variety. We were made to crave variety. And so I think that when we start pulling in, like, oh, that nutrition science is there, and it feels like an obligation, it feels like I have to eat this thing, that can become a burden of its own, right? Like, let's start with the mindset of, it's okay, it will work itself out. We can
Mhm.
get guidance in that process. And yeah, it is a process, because it's a lot of unlearning, as you said at the beginning, right?
Right.
It's a lot
Right.
of unlearning. And at the same time, we can trust that God knew what he was doing.
One of the things that I wrote down that I love that you say is nutrition science is population based. And an example that came to mind for me is, like, I have read a lot about protein and protein sources, and the ones that are really great for um, muscle protein synthesis, which is just basically, like, as you know, helping your muscles rebuild after after working hard. And you hear a lot about leucine and a lot about whey protein that can be so helpful. Well, I cannot do milk. I can't do whey. I can't do, any of that kind of stuff. And so I have been trying to find, and I've kind of gotten there, but it's just one of those things. Like, that was a population based, and I am not part of that population. Like, that distribution does not apply to me. And so I have to figure out what is applicable to me. And I do love also how you were talking about with starting with the mindset first. And I talk about that some when I'm asked, because I'm like, the crux of my ministry is we take care of ourselves so we can do what we're called to do. And helping that, for me, that helps take the focus off of my body. It helps, it doesn't completely eliminate me deal with the food police, because I know that there's a greater purpose beyond why I'm trying to move. Now, going back to some of the things that you do to support those in ministry, many of my women are in ministry in some sort of role, maybe officially within a church, or just on a volunteer, I shouldn't say just, but on a volunteer basis, or maybe they do something with a nonprofit. Talk to us some about how we can take care of ourselves. And this, I feel like this is a good place to end, because it will encompass a lot of what we talked about. But how can we take care of ourselves without making an idol out of wellness?
I think you said it earlier, just before this question, right? It's, why are we doing this? we're not doing this just so that we can get points and be healthier than everybody else. We're doing this because we want to learn how to appreciate the things that God has made. We want to be able to reach out to other people. You can't do that if you're lying on the ground because you're out of energy.
Right.
So it's a part of caring for, like stewarding well, I think, is usually how I think about it. Is this is a resource that we are given, and we want to steward that well. And I like that a lot better than our body is a temple, because it puts the emphasis on the temple and not who's living in it. We are a temple of the living God. And I hear that verse so misused to say that it has to look beautiful, because that's, in the past, the beauty of that and the elegance of that temple was to declare God's glory. And you don't see that in the New Testament in that same way. Like, we're actually told, like, the outside appearance isn't what is the important thing, right? So in that sense, like, we already know that that's not how you're supposed to interpret that phrase, your body is a temple. But I think being able to make it so that it's not a distraction. There will always be sickness. There will always be things that are going to affect our abilities. There will always be lies that come up to distract us, to bind us. It can be an area where we need to continually ask ourselves, like, why are we doing this? Who am I doing this for? Who told me that? Which voice is this? All those questions that we've been asking throughout this episode, to be able to bring those together and to say, who's getting the glory, right? Am I getting the glory because I'm working so hard at this? And, when you think about like weight loss efforts, right, intentional weight loss efforts, it's you that's trying to get the glory, right? It's you trying to do all these things. It's not like, wow, look at this wonderful body that God has created and put me in. Apart from the size or the shape, like, wow, this is amazing that God has given us a body so that we can interact in, and that he's given us this body so that we can understand better the body of Christ. We're not trying to change and manipulate and force ourselves into trying to be a certain piece of the body that we're not supposed to be, right? We want to be accepting of the place that God has put us in the body of Christ. And a part of that, we're not going to understand if we're always at war with our own bodies, physical bodies. So I think it just keeps coming back to, like, why are we doing this? Where's our focus, right?
Right. And I wrote that down. Who's getting the glory? That's such a powerful reminder of where our mindset is and where our focus is. So one thing that I know that you have is a download on silencing the food police. So if this is piquing the interest and people are like, okay, I now recognize what the food police is, and it's all of these external things and these things that are not necessarily of God, where can they get that, and what can they expect to receive in this download?
Yeah, they can get it from my website. I also have a direct link that I can share with you after this.
Sure, we'll put that in the show notes too.
Mm-hmm. So if you go to the download, you'll actually find a little bit of background, and then a list of things that you can say, responses that you can say when something comes up, whether it's in your own head or externally, like someone makes a comment about your food or your body. You can respond, and those responses, because I think a lot of the world responses can be like, oh, you just have to stand up to them and you just say this thing. It doesn't matter what their intentions were. I don't like that approach. I think there may be a time and place for that. If the person is really rude about it, like, I think you can have that firm boundary, but I think you can have a firm boundary without being mean. You don't have to respond to the same energy that they have, right? Because we are called to follow Christ. And
to respond in love.
And to respond in love. And there's truth, right? Like, you can say, my health is between me and my healthcare provider.
Right.
And that's fine, right? And you can be firm about that. And that's not mean. And that's true. And that's in love. But you could say that same thing and be really rude about it. So I think that there's a difference. And so what I've tried to do is compassionately categorize some of these things so that you have responses in a variety of situations where it's not just like these angry responses or like totally like, I just really, really would prefer not to talk about this right now. Like, yeah, sure, you can say you'd prefer not to talk about this. I think, I can't remember if it's in this one or another one. I have a companion blog post about the food police thing too. And in one of them I wrote, kindness doesn't mean being a doormat. You can have your boundary and be kind, right? So that's where this is coming from. There's a bunch of responses from the being really kind and gentle to still being loving, but setting a more firm, more explicit boundary if somebody's just not getting it, or somebody is like more on the bullying side of things. You can stand up for yourself. Right. That's okay. So there's some just like scripts, responses, and then there's space for you to make your own.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think that's a wonderful resource because sometimes we just need a little help, right? And, we're at someone's house for the holidays or, oh, you should, or you're at a holiday gathering. I mean, there's so many scenarios where we're hearing the food police either from other people or in our heads. So I just think that that's a really, really great resource that you have. Okay. So I would love to end with a few questions that I ask all of my guests. One is I love learning about people's tattoos because what I have found is most of the time when people choose to put something on their body for the rest of their life, they have a good story, not always. So I was wondering if you had any tattoos, and if so, if you would mind sharing what it is and what it means. And if you don't, but you had to get one, what would it be and where would it go?
Yeah, I don't have any tattoos, but like you, very curious about everyone else's. If I had to, like I was forced to for some reason, I would probably get a dragonfly on my shoulder, or like up here, because way back when gel pens were a thing, I used to stencil gel pen one on me, and that particular shape and location and in the gel pen tattoo is quite significant because it played a role in helping me realize that life is worth living. So the details of that is like for another time, but dragonflies are quite meaningful. And if I was having to choose a permanent thing to stick on my body for the rest of life, I would put that just as a reminder.
That's very good. And I am actually a huge fan of dragonflies because here in the South Texas, Houston area, we have a lot of gnats and the dragonflies eat the gnats. And so when the gnats are really bad, or no-see-ums, they're also called here. And so you can just see, there'll just be a ton of them flying in and out. And I'm like, bring on the dragonflies, because those no-see-ums, boy, they bite me, and it's just downhill from there. But thank you for sharing that. With the gel pen. Yes, totally understand. I totally remember that. Okay. So on a different vein, do you have a meaningful Bible verse you would like to share?
Yeah. And I think it goes with a lot of what we say too, because I use it as a filter for a lot of the things that I think about. And that's Philippians 4:8-9, which says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you.
That's great. I love that. And I think that is a filter is a great word for that verse. There, yes. Amen to all of that. Okay, Shelly, tell people how they can connect with you. And we will put that link to your download in the show notes, so that will be easily accessible. But if they just want to kind of learn a little bit more and connect with you on the socials or anywhere else, tell people where they can connect with you.
Sure. My website is confidentnutritionnow.com. Confident is spelled with a T, confident. It's hard to hear. Confidentnutritionnow.com. My Instagram is probably the one that I'm most active in, at Confident Nutrition Travels. And then I have a Facebook group, Intuitive Eating for Busy Women.
Awesome. Fantastic. Very good. Okay. So I would love it if you would kind of think about our conversation, and if you would leave us with the one simple thing that you would like us to remember. So this can be an overarching, it can be just a really small nugget, but just one simple thing to walk away with, because we covered a lot today.
We did cover a lot. I think one of the main questions that I leave people with, and it's something that I go back to quite often as well, is what is the most nourishing thing that I can do for me right now? What is the most nourishing thing I can do for me right now? It doesn't have to be food. It could be food. But it's a nice question, especially in combination with the Philippians verse. What's the most nourishing thing I can do for me right now?
So good. So good. I love it. Okay, that is all for today. Go out there and have a graced day.